find out what they're willing to pay. Do as much as you can to understand your customers at really deep levels so that you can understand the value that you're offering to them and then charge what you're worth in value rather than necessarily your time or your product.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the spectacular relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving. Today, our guest is David Richards. Here are 3 things you want to know about David before we start. First, he runs a company with a fantastic name, Talk About Value. He frequently interacts with me on LinkedIn, love having those conversations, and he's passionate about classical singing. Wait till you hear his deep voice when he wants to share it with us. Welcome, David.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
I'm pretty excited about this. So first off, what is Talk About Value? What are you trying to do there?
My ambition is to put value at the top of the agenda in businesses. And what I mean by that is that to ensure that, in effect, people understand how value can beat price every day. And by showing their value, you can really start to engage with customers at a really deeper level. And as a result, you can do more profitable business, you can do more business, and you'll also gain customer loyalty as well. So what I do is help people to create value, to understand what value is, then create it. Then, of course, the most important thing is to validate that value with your customers. Because, as you know, Mark, value is in the eye of the customer, not in yours. They define what value is, not you. And I think it's really important that people understand that, because too many times, particularly my fellow marketeers, believe that just saying what you sell is enough. What you need to do is to link that with what people want to buy.
I absolutely love that answer in so many ways. I often find it frustrating that when I talk about the fact that I'm a pricing expert, so many people say to me, oh, no, I don't do pricing. But what I really am is a value expert, right? It's really about understanding value. And so I think that's absolutely fascinating. Now, have you thought about this hard enough to be able to give me a definition of value?
Well, I think value can be described in many different ways. It's a hard one to define per se. And I know one of the people on one of your previous podcasts has said it's a mystery, and I'm probably not as cynical as that. But I think the way to look at it is to look in its way. It's interesting, isn't it, Mark? Because people know when you have value, but they actually know it more when you don't have value. It's a bit like quality. When things are poor quality, you get it. But what does high quality mean? What does, if something is not good value for money, you understand it intuitively. But what is good value for money? It's quite an interesting word. So the way I like to describe it mainly is that it's activities you undertake that can add a benefit to the success of the customer that you're working with. And that can happen in a number of ways. And I think there are sort of 5 regions of value that I look at. So the first one is financial value, which most people get. It's that ROI, it's that return on investment, it's the cost benefit analysis. It's simply doing the numbers in terms of saying, I'm going to invest this money and this is what I'll get back. And I think at some level that's useful. And you'll know lots of companies and corporates use that simple methodology for analyzing projects. But what it misses is the value that you can offer that it really brings it to life in a way, the more emotional things. So things like perceived value. So I often say, why do people buy a Rolls Royce whereas they could drive a simple, you give me an example of an American vehicle.
Ford.
A Ford, yeah. Why does somebody, because actually the reality is that the need of a vehicle is simply to get you from A to B. That's what it's designed to do, is to take you from place A to place B. So why would you want to buy something that is 5-6 times the cost of another vehicle? And the reason, is it's about bragging power. I don't know if that's a good word in American, but being able to show off to your friends. It's about the status it can give you. That's an area of value that many people don't even consider.
Yeah. So David, do me a favor real fast and run through the names of the 5 values that we're going to chat about, because I really want to interrupt you and talk to you about each one of these.
Yeah.
But I feel like if I do that, we're not going to get all 5.
No problem. So there's financial, there's perceived, there's relational, there's experiential, and there's social. Those are the 5. What's quite interesting is the last one, which I think has for a long time been floating around is now coming to the fore, particularly in the UK, where social value, social enterprises, people giving back something to the community, either in terms of to people who require additional support, or even, if you like, in the eco world is quite important. But
okay, so you are causing me to think hard, David. Thank you. I love that. And first off, let me give you my definition of value. I think value is what a customer is willing to pay.
yes, we've had that discussion before, Mark, I know.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And
I think that's right from a pricing point of view. I think that's absolutely right. What I found is that, particularly in the UK, that concept of willingness to pay is quite difficult for people to understand. So
really,
yeah, it's not common language that I found. But if you can give, if you like, war stories or examples of where value you can offer value in different ways, people seem to click into that more readily. That might be just my experience, but there's certainly an interesting fact, I think.
so I want to talk about your five value. What did you call them? Five value
Well, elements of value, or ways
elements.
that you
Okay.
ways you can create value.
I would think of those as sources of value creation,
Yep, I
right?
agree.
So how is it that I could create value? And I could take any one of those and turn that into willingness to pay,
Yeah,
right? Oh, yeah, I'm willing to pay more because you guys are a socially conscious company. You care about the environment. Therefore, I pay a little bit more because I want to support you and your organization.
sure.
So I think that's a nice way to say, okay, here's where value comes from. I like that a lot.
You can read reports from Bain Consultancy, and I've got in my office, I've got probably 15, 16 different books on value, and they all have a slightly different description. Some are equations that you can create about total cost of investment minus the total benefit you get minus the total cost of ownership, that type of thing. I think what I found is that sometimes that goes over the heads of people, and that just saying basically you can offer value in five sort of different ways, and what you need to do is go back into your business and work out areas where you potentially don't add value that you should be, because people are willing to pay for it, to use your phrase, or the other way where you're giving value away and not charging for it, which I've seen as well. So I think
All the time.
there's all sorts of different ways of making it work. But I think if you conceptually put it as just five areas that you need to focus on, as you say, that you can use to make people more willing to pay for your services or products or professional expertise, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I've got to say I'm a huge cynic in a lot of ways. And so when I look at things like first off, if I was in a B2B sale, I would say all of these get tied back to financial. So I'm not going to, no offense to anybody, but I'm not going to care about the environment and put money into saving the environment unless I get kudos from people, and more people, my customers are going to value that. And so therefore I get paid for that.
I agree to a degree. If you've got a strong purchasing methodology, you've got people whose role is to do that, then they will take a very rational approach to the decision making. I think the one thing you do need to remember, though, is that humans are generally making decisions in a lot of cases, and they have biases and they have wishes that are not necessarily financial. It may be that they want to just work with somebody they like working with. That's a sort of relationship value.
100% with you. And so I would take, so although I love financial from a B2B, I think in the end, the logic we have to use in B2B is always financial. I would think in truth, it's almost always what I would call perceived, in the sense that it's, what do I think is true? Do I think I like you? Do I think you're helping the environment? Do I think I'm going to make money if I buy your product?
The old classic you remember from IBM, that nobody ever got sacked for buying IBM.
Yes.
It's that perceived value, that it's worth its weight in gold, really, because people will make decisions not necessarily what you're charging, but what they're willing to pay. It's back to your point, and they're prepared to pay extra for the safety net that IBM was giving them, or the ability to solve a problem if it went wrong, or the support mechanisms, or whatever IBM was doing. I think
Yes.
that's the powerful bit.
Time out for a quick ad. If you're currently working in a subscription business, I'm guessing this is what your world feels like. Oh my gosh, the CEO just said we need to grow faster. I already have too many things to do. Now what are we adding? Which of these things should I be doing? If I only sleep 4 hours and I come in earlier, I can get more done. Well, here's my advice. You can go with the flow and do what you're told. I mean, doing busy work and doing what other people tell you to do isn't the worst job in the world. After all, I used to dig ditches for a living. Or there's a better alternative. Take responsibility. You determine what drives your product's growth. When you choose the right activities and then execute them well, it boosts your career. To help you drive your product's growth, we put together a powerful online course called Accelerate Your Subscription Business. This course provides you the framework that helps you decide which of your tasks are most important right now. Most importantly, though, it helps you think strategically about your subscription business, not just about your tactics. The course is only $500. What a tiny investment considering what this could do for your company and your career. To learn more, go to www.championsofvalue.com. I look forward to seeing you there. Yes. Okay, so I think we've at least touched on 4 of the 5. Real quickly, what's experiential value?
That's basically my experience of working with somebody. So, you go into a relationship, and in the early days, you don't really know, especially if it's a new client, you don't really know what they're going to be like. You're taking a degree of risk in that. You probably looked at testimonials and case studies and war stories about them to give you some idea that they're a credible organization that are worth working with. But until it comes down to the delivery of a service or a product or support or professional expertise, you don't really know. And generally people like to work with people they like working with, just as human relationships. I've often heard that people, when somebody closes a deal, they say, well, it's just because I'm a great salesperson. And and I know that may be a factor, but there could be a whole load of other value things. It might be the company had a great brand. It might be that they'd had a relationship before, or they knew of somebody who'd used the service. There may be other things impacting on that. And this is the bit I find that most companies miss, is the stuff around the financial bit. It's as I said, it's the perceived value, the relationship value, the experiential value, and then there's social value as well.
Okay, so as a company, what are you guys doing?
Well, basically, we're going into typically business-owned organizations who really aren't growing as fast as they can do, and they don't understand quite why. Their sales are stalled, or they're having issues in breaking into a market. And what we do is we go in, we basically look to segment their market for them, to work with them and understand how their market operates, to identify their target market, the key players in that market decision-making unit, and then create value propositions for the segments they want to attack. And very rarely do I find somebody who's got that all lined up in one go. Quite often there's a lot of understanding about the market, but then splitting that down into different needs rather than geographies or sectors or whatever can be challenging. And then creating value in those sectors needs a real deep understanding of customer engagement. It really needs, I think, far more time spent by marketing teams looking and understanding the customer than we probably have done in the past. Once that's done, you've agreed what your target market sector is, what the value proposition is, then you can roll that out into the community through your communication channels, whether that's social media or whether it's email or whatever. And you're consistent into the markets you're addressing. And I believe that if you do that successfully, you'll grow your business more quickly and more profitably.
I think what you're saying is an absolute no-brainer. I would absolutely agree as well that I don't know that I've ever walked into a company where they truly understood A, their market segments, and B, what value they were offering to the buyers in those market segments.
Yep, I totally agree. I've just been writing something about segmentation in general, and one of the things we see in the UK as a lot is simply geographical segmentation on a regional basis or a zip code, postcode basis. And the salespeople just treat that as a territory that they own, and they'll go in and talk to their customers in exactly the same way, irrespective of the industry sector or the knowledge or the need of that customer. And what I'm saying is, yes, that might be a good way of managing the cost of sales of a sales team. But what you also need to do on top of that is help that sales team understand the needs of the particular people within their market sector. So rather than going in with one set of PowerPoint slides for every company, is you might have 4 or 5 dependent on the sectors and the segments where you've identified a common need. You're overlapping both need segmentation with a geographical segmentation. But it's rarely done, Mark, that I've seen that where people will do that. But I think if you want to be really successful, you need to be the best you can in each of the segments you're playing in. And just trying to cover everything and never saying no is not a sustainable competitive advantage, in my opinion.
Oh my gosh, there's no way you can win at high prices if you're going to do that.
No, because you can't offer the value. You can't understand the customers enough so that you
Yeah.
can really understand the value they're going to get from you. Completely agree.
Yeah, there's a fascinating concept that I ran into a couple years ago, and I have just been so enamored with it lately. It's called a value conversation.
Yep.
And it's where we teach salespeople, as opposed to walking in and saying, hey, let me tell you about the value of my product. It's how we go in and ask the customer or the buyer questions so that they can tell us the value that they might achieve if we solve their problems. And just amazing conversations.
We've discussed this before, Mark, but an even more simple concept, if you're not having those valued conversations, I think, is to ask a customer of yours at the point of winning a new contract why they bought from you, just to understand at that point in time, because it's a point where they don't really have an understanding of your experiential value, maybe not even your relationship value, because it may be a new account, but you get an idea of what value they see from you per se, mainly from your marketing messaging and also from your sales messaging if you've got a sales team. And I think that's quite a critical point. And I'm always amazed when I go to a networking event and ask somebody, okay, so when did you last talk to your customer about why they bought from you? How few people do it. And I think that's so disappointing, because that's where the insight is. That's where the deep knowledge is that you can use to your advantage. But it's rarely done. And I think value conversations is absolutely the way to go.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is if I just ask somebody why they bought from me and they give me an answer, oftentimes I can just go repeat those words to the next buyer and they'll buy from me too. Like, oh, wow.
The only caveat I would say, Mark, is that sometimes it may not be best to ask the person who sold the product or service, their expertise, to interview the customer.
Definitely.
Because it will be biased towards, the information will be fed back in a way that is more positive in some ways than others. So one thing I have said to people is that rather than you do it, may employ an outside consultant to do it, or a senior member of your team that's not related to the delivery or the sales process, maybe on the delivery side, so they can have a more open conversation which gets into the reality of the situation. In fact, one of the things I do now is when I do a case study for a client, I spend the first 10 minutes of that case study interview understanding why they bought the products and services in the first place, because suddenly you uncover some really interesting insights that you wouldn't have necessarily thought about. And that's where it can really add value to the relationship.
Yes. Yeah. Nice. Hey, let's take the last few minutes. You posted a article that was talking about Van Westendorp's price sensitivity meter on LinkedIn, and you ended up getting a bunch of what I'll call relatively high-powered pricing people to argue, which is pretty cool.
Mark, I didn't expect that. I just thought it was bizarre. I was at a conference recently, and the name cropped up. To be honest, I hadn't really heard. I'd heard about it, but I didn't know what it meant. So I thought, as a marketeer, I ought to go and find out. So I did a bit of research and dug around, and I found out this concept by this Dutch economist who basically helped people understand how to look at optimizing their pricing and working out the highs and low. How much would be, if you were buying something, what would seem to be too expensive for a product, or
Let me
it be too cheap?
let me read the questions,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, just so
Sure.
everybody can hear it. So with Van Westendorp, what you do is you go out and you describe your product or what you're trying to sell, and then you ask 4 questions. You're not prompting them with any prices or anything, but the 4 questions you ask is, at what price would you consider the product to be so expensive that you would not consider buying it? At what price would you consider the product to be priced so low that you feel the quality couldn't be very good? At what price do you consider the product just starting to get expensive, so it's not out of the question, but you would have to give some thought to buying it. At what price would you consider the product to be a bargain, a great buy for the money? Okay, back to you, David. Those are the 4
Yeah.
questions.
And conceptually, I think that's a really important idea. I felt it was important that somebody who's struggling with price and doesn't even know where to start in terms of whether they can increase it or what people are prepared to pay or the willingness to pay, it would give them at least a basis on which to start a conversation. And I was quite surprised by the response because clearly, as you said, a number of the great and the good in the pricing world had slightly different opinions. Many were supportive of it, like you were, Mark, and you were saying that it's a useful tool. But people were also very happy to share the weaknesses of it, which is mainly, if you're working with, say, for example, high luxury items where there is, in my language, far more perceived value than financial value, where it can skew it so that it's meaningless. But I was delighted with the debate about it. I think it's, I wanted to share an idea, and stirring up that debate, I think, in my view, adds some value to the whole conversation about price and pricing.
Yeah, I think the debate in that whole posting was around, is this a great technique or not? And I think the answer should be, it's a good technique for getting a rough estimate, and there are better techniques for being more precise.
Yeah, I think it's a concept that people who are not pricing experts will understand, I guess, is where I come from. It's just a way that a CEO or somebody who's running a business who's got a problem with pricing can see that there are methodologies available that can help them make sense of their pricing and how they can optimize their pricing. If they want to if they're in a particular industry where every price point is so critical, they need to get it spot on. You're absolutely right. You need more sophisticated and cleverer techniques to do that. I just like the idea. I think it was a really, really clever idea, and somebody implemented and did something about it. And I just wanted to share that.
Yeah. And I actually think that if you use the Van Westendorp's price sensitivity meter technique, it is probably better than what 90% of companies are doing today.
I think you're being very generous with 90%, Mark.
Oh, okay. So
this is my experience in working in this field for many years in marketing is, of the 4 traditional P's of marketing, price, promotion, place, and product, the one that I spent least time on and there's least information about is price. And yet it is the tool that you can change the direction of your business most quickly and most effectively. We spend, and I don't know if this is your experience in the States, but we spend far too little time on price and pricing.
Oh, that is so true. That is so true. But it's fascinating. Okay, so I'm going to share with you and all my listeners a trick that I've used many, many times. I teach this in my classes, but I don't think I've ever said this in public.
Wow.
What I do instead of Van Westendorp's price sensitivity meter is I often ask a different question. And I don't ask, how much are you willing to pay? I often ask the question, how much do you think somebody else like you would be willing to pay?
I like it. It's a bit like the interview question. So if I was to meet a friend of yours on the street, what would they say about you?
Yes.
Yeah, I
yes.
like it. I like it.
So it's pretty fascinating. When I teach that, I often talk about the election, and you know how most of the pollsters didn't predict that Trump was going to win the election.
Yep.
But a few of them did. And a couple of the ones who got it right, the question they asked wasn't, who are you going to vote for? It was, who is your neighbor going to vote for?
Cool.
And so it was a way of saying, look, I'm not talking about you.
Yeah.
But when I answer the question, I'm talking about me.
Yeah.
Right.
But actually it's talking about you. Yeah, I get that. It's a great question, to be honest. It's a great way of putting it.
Just don't tell anybody else I
I promise. I promise. No problem.
Excellent. David, I always wrap up with the last question, so I've got to ask you this. What's one piece of pricing advice you'd give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
Find out what they're willing to pay. Do as much as you can to understand your customers at a really deep level so that you can understand the value that you're offering to them and then charge what you're worth in value rather than necessarily your time or your product or whatever.
Boy, I couldn't agree more. That was awesome. David, thank you so much for your time today. If anyone wants to contact you, how can they do that?
Well, probably the easiest way is to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm publishing on a regular basis, and I'm writing a book that'll be out in August 2020 about my experiences in business and, discussing some of the things we've discussed today. So yeah, if people want to find me, I'm David A. Richards, MBA, and I look forward to connecting with people and sharing my ideas.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, that's a wrap on episode number 40. Wow. I got to tell you, my favorite part of today's podcast, boy, it's hard to say. I love talking about Van Westendorp, but I also really enjoyed thinking about the 5 sources of value we talked about early on. What was your favorite part? Please let us know in the comments or wherever you downloaded and listened to the podcast. And while you're at it, would you please give us a 5-star review? If you have any questions or comments about the podcast or about pricing, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.